Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to Ancient Irish Tales. And this batch of tales today is the tales of the deaths of the Ulster Heroes. Join me now, won't you? Death Tales of the Ulster Heroes. Again in the Ulster cycle, of course, nearing the end. In spite of, the embarrassment attendant upon representing the unquestionable champion of Ulster as falling in battle, the ancient Irish saga writers could not resist the temptation to depict his death. The result was the Great Root of Muchan, Burach Muamag Muchan, generally known as the Death of Cu Chulainn, which is the first story in the set of tales. The Death of Cu Chulainn was composed probably as early as the 8th century, but it was around a lot longer, by a writer of unusual ability. It is one of the most striking pieces of early Irish literature. The closing passage describes Cu Chulainn's death in a genuinely heroic in conception and in style. Fully conscious that is his end as near, Cu Chulainn goes forth into battle, despite the omens that warned him, like Comrar in The Destruction of the Dagger's Hostel, which we read before. He is forced to break the taboos upon which his life depends, and at length he falls, fighting single-handed against a band of vengeful but cowardly enemies. The other two death tales given below, although written more or less in order to contain some interesting motifs, among the most instructive of them being the attachment of the pagan king, Conchobar, to the Christian, basically Conchobar, the king of Ulster, does get, forced to go over to the Christian tradition. This being an attachment of this particular phrase of the story is obviously an afterthought, added to the fairy tale date to the narrative, undoubtedly a preemptive text, to a narrative of the primitive text, because of Cu Chulainn's position as the central figure of the Ulster cycle. The account of his death is placed first, though the death of Celtchar is represented by the author as preceding it. Now, in theory, what all that means is, right now we're going to read about a bunch of people's deaths. The heroes of the Ulster, one of which is Cu Chulainn, the king of Conchobar. Basically, in it, before his death, will of course go over to Christianity, and the fact Cu Chulainn is first in these short vignettes of the deaths is because he is the central focus of the Ulster cycle. He is the main hero, from his birth to his miraculous fightings as a kid to even growing up and all his feats as an adult. This is unfortunately how he succumbs. And we also get to the point near the end of the story, which I will maybe, possibly, more than likely talk about at the end, on how the Vorgu, who is depicted as a battle goddess, she's so much more: sovereignty, passion, love, fertility, change, all that kind of stuff. Part of her also is nurturing. She's the one who helps, Cu Chulainn break the taboos, but is there for him at the end. Now, the death of Cu Chulainn. When Cu Chulainn's foes came for the last time against him, his land was filled with smoke and flame. The weapons fell from their ranks, and the day of his death drew nigh. The evil tidings were brought to him, and the maiden Lochram bade him arise. Though he was worn out from fighting in defence of the plain of Muram, and Niam, his wife of Conall, the victorious, also spoke to him. So he sprang to his arms and flung his mantle around him, put the brooch fell and pierced his foot, forewarning him. Then he took a shield and ordered his charioteer Log to harness his horse, the Grey of Macha. Oh, I swear by the gods by whom my people swear, said Log. Though the men of Conchobar's province were around the Grey of Macha, they could not bring him to the chariot. I never refused thee till today. If thou wilt come, thou wilt speak with the Grey himself. Cu Chulainn went to him, and thrice did the horse turn his left side to his master. On the night before, the Vorgu had broken the chariot. For she liked not Cu Chulainn's going into battle, for she knew that it would not come again, that he would not come again to Emin Macha. Then Cu Chulainn reproached his horse, saying that he was not wont to deal thus with his master. The Grey of Macha came, and let his big round tears fall blood upon Cu Chulainn's feet. And then Cu Chulainn leapt into the chariot and drove it suddenly southwards along the road to Ulster. And Leprechaun met him, and besought him not to leave them. And the thrice 50 queens who were in Emin Macha, and who loved him, cried to him with a great cry. And when he turned his chariot to the right, they gave a scream of wailing and lamentation, and smote their hands, for they knew he would not come to them again. The house of his nurse that had fostered him was before him on the road. He used to go to it whenever he went driving past her southwards, and from the south. And she kept for him always a vessel to drink therein. Now he drank a drink and fared forth bidding to his nurse farewell. Then he saw 3 crones, blind in the left eye, before him on the road. He cooked the spits of the rowan tree a dog with poisonous and spells. One of the things that Cu Chulainn was bound not to do. He was going into the cooking hearth and consuming the food. This was because of his guise, or taboos. And another things he must not do was eating his namesake's flesh. And as we all know, Cu Chulainn is named after the dog. Since his name was Cu, hound, he was forbidden to eat dog's flesh. And what is he doing? Eating dog's flesh. He spied on and was about to pass them, but he knew they were not there for his good. And then said a crone to him, the Vorgu, visit us, O Cu Chulainn. I will not visit you. In sooth, said Cu Chulainn, the food is only a hound, she said. Were this a great cooking hearth, thou wouldst have visit us, but because there is here little, thou comest not. Unseemly are the great who endure not a little and poor. Then he drew nigh to her, and the crone gave him the shoulder blade of the hound out of her left hand. And then Cu Chulainn ate it out of his left hand, and put it under his left thigh. The hand that took it and the thigh under which he was put was seized from trunk to end, so that the normal strength abode not in them. Then he drove along the road to Celtchar, around Sebed Fruit, and his enemy, Ir, son of Conchobar, saw him in the chariot, with the sword shining ready in his hand, and the light of valor hovering over him, and his 3-hue hair strings of golden thread over the edge of the anvil, and some cunning craftsmen. "That man is coming towards us, O man of Erin," said Eric. "Await him." So they made a fence of their linked shields, and at each corner Eric made them place 2 of the bravest to fight each other. And the satyrs which these pairs, he told the satyrs to ask Cu Chulainn for his spear. For the sons of Celtchar had prophesied of his spear that a king would be slain by it, unless it were given when demanded. And he made the men of Erin utter a cry. And Cu Chulainn rushed against them in his chariot, performing his 3 thunder feats, and he piled his spear and the sword, so that the halves of their heads and skulls and hands and feet and their red bones were scattered broadcast throughout the plain of Merin, in number like the sands of the sea and the stars of heaven, dewdrops of May, flakes of the snow, hailstone, leaves of the forest, buttercups on Megbrug, and the grass under the hooves of the herds on a dry day in summer. And the grey was the field, with their brains after all the onslaught flying of weapons which Cu Chulainn dealt into them. Then he saw one of the pairs of warriors contending together, and the satyrs called on him to intervene. And Cu Chulainn leapt at them, and with 2 blows of his fist dashed out their brains. "That spear to me," said the satirist. "I swear what my people swear," said Cu Chulainn. "Thou dost not need it more than I do. The men of Erin are upon me here, and I am attacking them. I will reveal thee if I will revel thee if thou dost give it," said the satirist. "I have never yet been revelled because of my niggardness or my chivalrous." With that, Cu Chulainn flung his spear at him with its handle foremost, and it passed through his head and killed 9 on the other side of him. And Cu Chulainn drove through the host, but Log, son of Churu, got the spear. Cu Chulainn had slain Churu earlier, as well as the kingsmen and others who took part in his death. "What will fall by this spear, O sons of Catelyn?" asked Log. "The king will fall by that spear," said the sons of Catelyn. And Lugud flung the spear at Cu Chulainn's chariot, and it reached the charioteer, Log mac Rugbra, and all of his bowels came forth on the cushion of the chariot. "Then," said Log, bitterly, "I have been wounded." Thereafter Cu Chulainn drew out the spear, and Log bade him farewell. Then said Cu Chulainn, "Today I shall be a warrior, and I shall be a charioteer also." Then he saw a second pair contending, and one of them said it was a shame for him not to intervene. And Cu Chulainn sprang upon them and dashed them into pieces against a rock. "That spear to me, O Cu Chulainn," said the satirist. "I swear what my people swear. Thou dost not need the spear more than I do. On my hand and on my valor and my weapons it rests today, to sweep the 4 provinces of Erin today from the plain of Merin." "I will revel thee," said the satirist. I'm not bound to grant thee more than one request a day, and moreover, I've already paid for my honor. I will revel Ulster for thy default, said the satirist. Never yet has Ulster been revelled for my refusal, nor for my churlishness. Although little of my life remains to me, Ulster shall not be revelled this day. Then Cu Chulainn cast his spear at him by the handle, and again it went through his head and killed 9 behind him. And Cu Chulainn drove through the host, even as he had done before. Then Eric, son of Conchobar, took the spear. What shall fall by this spear, O sons of Catelyn? Said Eric, son of Conchobar. It's not hard to say, a king falls by that spear, said the sons of Catelyn. I heard you say that a king would fall by the spear which Lug long since cast. And that is true, said the sons of Catelyn. Thereby fell the king of the charioteers of Erin, namely Cu Chulainn's charioteer Lug Mac-Rogba. Now, Eric cast the spear at Cu Chulainn, and it lighted on his horse, the grey of Macha. Cu Chulainn snatched out the spear, and each of them bade the other farewell. Theris the grey of Macha left him, with half the yoke under his neck, and went into the Grey's Lynn in Shafut. Therefore Cu Chulainn again drove through the host, and saw a third pair contending, and he intervened, as he had done before. And the satirist again demanded his spear, and Cu Chulainn at first refused it. I will revel thee, said the satirist. I have paid for my honor today. I'm not bound to grant thee more than one request today. I will revel Ulster for thy fault. I have paid for Ulster's honor, said Cu Chulainn. Then I will revel thy race. Tidings that I have been defamed shall never reach the land I have not reached. For little there is of my life remaining, said Cu Chulainn. He flung the spear at him, handle foremost, and it went through his head and through thrice 9 other men. 'Tis grace with wrath, O Cu Chulainn, said the satirist. Then Cu Chulainn for the last time drove through the host, and Lug took the spear and said, What will fall by this spear, O sons of Catelyn? I heard you say that a king would fall by the spear that Eric cast this morning. That is true, they said. A king of the steeds of Erin had fell by it, namely the Grey of Macha. Then Lug flung the spear and struck Cu Chulainn, and his bowels came forth on the cushion of the chariot. And his only horse, the Black Sagan, fled away, with half the yoke hanging to him. And he left the chariot and his master, the king of the heroes of Erin, dying alone on the plain. Then, said Cu Chulainn, I will fain go as far as that loch to drink a drink thereout. We give thee leave, they said, provided thou dost come to us again. I will bid you come for me, if I cannot come myself. Then he gathered his bowels into his breast, and went forth to the loch. And there he drank his drink, and washed himself, and came forth to die, calling on his foes to come and meet him. Now a great mirroring went westwards from the loch, and his eye lit upon it. And he went to the pillar stone which the plain, and he put his breast girdle around it, that he might not die seated, nor lying down, but that he might die standing up. Then came the men all around him, but they did not go to him, for they thought he was alive. "It is a shame for you," said Eric, son of Conchobar, "not to take that man's head in revenge for my father's head, which was taken by him." Then came the grey of Macha to Cu Chulainn to protect him. As long as his soul was in him, and the hero's light out of his forehead remained, and the grey of Macha wrought the red roots around him. And 50 fell by his teeth, and 30 by each of his hooves. This is what he slew of the host, and hence the saying, "New keener was the victorious course of the grey of Macha after Cu Chulainn's slaughter." And then came the battle goddess Vorgu in the form of the skulled crows, and sat on his shoulder. "That pillar is not wont to be under birds," said Eric, son Conchobar, and Lugh arranged Cu Chulainn's hair over his shoulder and cut off his head. And then fell the sword from Cu Chulainn's hand and smote off Lander's right hand and fell on the ground. And Cu Chulainn's right hand was cutting off in revenge for this. Lugh and the host marched away, carrying with them Cu Chulainn's head and his right hand. And they came to Tara, and there is the sickbed on his head and on his right, and the full cover on his shield of the mound. From Tara they marched southwards to the river Liffey, but meanwhile the host of Ulster were hurrying to attack their foes, the colonel victorious driving in front of them to meet the grey of Macha, screaming with blood. Then Conall knew that Cu Chulainn had been slain, and he saw the grey of Macha and sought Cu Chulainn's body. And he saw Cu Chulainn at the pillar stone. Then went the grey of Macha and laid his head on Cu Chulainn's breast. And Cu Chulainn said, "A heavy care to the grey of Macha is that corpse." And Conall followed the host, meditating vengeance, for he was bound to avenge Cu Chulainn. For there was a comrade's covenant between Cu Chulainn and Conall the victorious, namely, that whichever of them was first killed should be avenged by the other. "And if I first be killed," said Cu Chulainn, "how soon wilt thou avenge me?" "The day on which thou shalt be slain, I will avenge thee before that evening." "And if I'm slain," said Conall, "how soon wilt thou avenge me?" "Thy blood will not be cold on the earth," said Cu Chulainn, "before I shall avenge thee." So Conall pursued Lugh and Liffey. Then was Lugh bathing. "Keep a lookout over the plain," he said to his charioteer, "that no one come with us without being seen." The charioteer looked. "One horseman is here coming to us," he said, "and great are the speed and swiftness with which he comes. Thou wouldst deem that they are ravens, all the ravens of Erin were above him. Thou wouldst deem the flakes of snow were speaking the plain before him. Unbeloved is the horseman that comes here," said Lugh. "It is Conall the victorious, mounted on dewy red. The birds thou sawest above him are the sods from that horse's hooves. The snowflakes thou sawest speckling the plain before him are the foam from the horse's lips and from the curbs of his bridle. Look again. What road is he coming?" "He is coming to the ford," said the charioteer. "The paths that the hosts are taking. Let that horse pass us. We desire not to fight against him." But when Conall reached the middle of the fjord, he spied Log and his charioteer and went to them. "Welcome is the debtor's face," said Conall. "He whom oweth debts demands them of him. I am the creditor for slaying of my comrade Cu Chulainn, and here I am suing thee for this." They then agreed to fight on the plain of Argos, and there Conall wounded Log with his javelin. Thence they went to a place called Federloch. "I wish," said Log, "to have the truth of the men from thee." "What is that?" said Conall the victorious. "That thou shouldest use only one hand against me. For one hand only have I." "Thou shalt have it," said Conall the victorious. So Conall's hand was bound to his sides with ropes. There 4 spaces between the 2 watches of the days they fought, and neither of them prevailed over the other. When Conall found that he prevailed not, he saw his steed Dewey red by Lanforth, and the steed came to Lor and tore a piece out of his side. "Woe is me. This is not the truth of men, O Conall. I give it only on my behalf," said Conall. "I give it not on behalf of the savage beasts and senseless things." "I know now," said Log, "that thou wilt not go takest my head with thee, since we took Cu Chulainn's head from him. So take. Since we took Cu Chulainn's head from him, so take my head in addition to thine own, to be added my realm to thy realm, and my valor for thy valor. For I prefer that thou should be the best hero in Erin." Thus Conall the victorious cut off Log's head, and Conall and his Ulstermen returned to Eamon Macha. That week they entered it not in triumph, but the soul of Cu Chulainn appeared there to the thrice 50 queens who loved him, and they saw him floating in his phantom chariot over Erin Macha, and they heard him chant a mystic song of the coming of the day of doom. The next tale, the death of Crettir Mac Uirnich. Whence the death of Crettir, naught had they tell. It was the famous man of the men of Ulster. Ballybirgda, he owned 7 herds of cattle, 7 scores of cow, and each herd he also kept a guest house. Nor was taboo of him that a woman should come in the company of his house, without him sleeping with her unless her husband were in her company. Then Bregbroth, the wife of Celtchar, went to his house. "Not good is thou without stun, woman. Thy coming as thou hast coming taboo to me." "It is a wretched man that violates his own taboos." "It is true, I am an old man, and moreover you are inciting me," he said. That night he slept with her. Conall came to know, and he went to seek his wife. Ballybur went to Conchobar in the royal house. Celtchar also went to the royal house, and that is where Conchobar and Cu Chulainn were playing a game of chess. Now, remember, these stories are out of order to which they actually happened. Because remember, because Cu Chulainn was the central theme, he got placed first in the series of Ulster Heroes' deaths. And Conchobar planted a spear through him so that it struck the wall behind him, so a drop of blood fell, and the point of the spear on the board. "Truly, Cu Chulainn," said Conchobar. "Indeed, then, Conchobar," said Cu Chulainn. And the board was measured from the drop hither and thither, to know which of them was nearer. Now the drop was near to Conchobar, and it was the longer till revenge. Ballybur, however, died. Celtchar escaped and went to the land of Derry and Munster in the south. "This is bad, O Conchobar," said the man of Ulster. "This means the ruin of Desi. And it was enough that we should lose the man who has died and let Celtchar come back to his land." "Let him come then," said Conchobar, "and let his son go forth to him, and let him be safeguarded. And at the time his men of Ulster, and the father's crime was not lain upon his son, nor the son's crime upon his father. So Curtius went to summon him until he was in the south. Wherefore have you come, my lad, said Celtchar. That you may come to your land, said the boy. What is my safeguard? I, said the lad. True, said, Subtle is the treachery of the men of Ulster practiced on me, that I should go to my son's guarantee. Subtle shall be his name, and the name of his offspring, said the Druid. Wait, lad, said Celtchar, and I will go with thee, and 'tis was done, hence is Semyon the land of Desde. However, this is fine and well demanded, Berrybrugger, and to free them from the worst parts what would come to Ulster in his time. Then Conchar's Hornskin MacDirg went to avenge his brother Churi MacDirry MacDonald upon the men of Ulster. He devastated Ulster greatly. Spears or swords hurt him not, but sprang from him and as from horn. Free us from this pest, O creature, said Conchobar. I will surely, said Creature, and on certain day he went to convenes with Celtchar and belittled him, promising his daughter Nim as well as the daughter for 100 of every afternoon to be supplied him. Then the woman beguiled him, saying, Tell me how you may be killed. Red-hot iron spits have to be thrust into the soles and through my shins, he said. Then she told her father that she should have 2 large spits made, and a sleeping spell put on them, and they should gather a large host so that it be done. And they went into their bellies, and the spears were thrust into his soles, and with sledgehammers, and right through his marrow, so that he died by them. And Celtchar cut off his head, and over which a cairn was raised, and a stone was placed by every man that came there. And this was the second pest, the mouse brown, that was the whelp, and the son of the widow had found in the hollow of an oak, which the willow reared until it was big. At least then it turned upon the sheep of the window and killed her cows, and her son, and killed herself, and then went to the glen of the great sow. Every night it would devastate the stronghold in Ulster, and every day it lay asleep. Free us from it, O Celtchar, said Conchobar. And Celtchar went into a wood and brought out a log of alder, and the hole was dug into it as long as the arms. He boiled it in a fragment of herbs and honey, and in grease until it was soft, yet through. Then Celtchar went through the cave in which the mouse brown used to sleep, and he entered the cave early, before the hound came after it to slaughter. And he came with the sout raised high in the air, and smelt of the wood, and Celtchar pushed the wood out of the cave towards it. The hound took it in his jaws and put his teeth into it, and the teeth struck through the wood. Saddle pulled the wood towards him, and the hound pulled on the other side, and Celtchar put him in his arm and log side inside, and took his heart out through his jaws, so that he hid in his hand, and he took his head with him. And that day, at the end of the year afterwards, cowherds were by the side of the cairn of Conchobar, and a herd of squalling by the side of the cairn. And that day they dug up the cairn and found 3 whelps in it, namely the dun hound, and a speckled hound, and a black The speckled hound was given as a present to MacDonald of Leinster, And for his sake multitudes of men of Ireland fell at the house of Macduff, and Alba was the name of that hound. And that would be Chulainn the Smith, and it would be to Chulainn the Smith that the Dunhound was given. Again, this comes way before, even before Cu Chulainn killed the hound. The Black Hound was Celtchar's own doshu, and let no man take hold to save Celtchar. Once upon a time, when Celtchar was not at home, the hound was let out. The people of the household could not catch it, and it turned among the cattle and the flocks, and last destroyed a living creature every night in Ulster. "Free us from that pest, O Celtchar," said Conchobar. And Celtchar went forward to the glen, and the hound was, and 100 warriors went with him. And 3 times he called the hound, until they saw it coming towards them, making straight for Celtchar until it was licking his feet. "It is sad indeed what the hound does," said all. "I will no longer be incriminated on your account," said Celtchar, giving it a blow with the lun spear of Gritchir, so that he brought out its heart, whereupon it died. "Whoa!" cried everybody. "'Tis true," said he, and he raised the spear when a drop of the hound's blood ran along the spear and went through him to the ground, so that it died of it. And his lament was set up in his stone, and the tomb were raised there. So this is the tragical death of Belburga and Comcha and Cricho McIlste. And now, the final hero, if you will, in the Ulster cycles. This is his death. And it is the death of the mighty Conchobar. Once upon a time, the men of Ulster were greatly intoxicated at Emmenmecha. Thrice there was a great contagious in comparison of trophies between them, especially between Conall and Cu Chulainn and Logar. "Bring me," said Conall, "the brain of Magistra, so that I may take upon competing warriors." At that time it was custom with the men of Ulster to take brains out of the head of every warrior whom they slew in single combat, and mix lime with them, so that they were made into hard balls. And whenever they were in contention or comparison of trophies, these were brought to them, so that they had them in their hands. "Well, O Conchobar," said Conall, "until competing warriors perform a deed like this in single combat, they are not capable of comparing trophies with me." "'Tis true," said Conchobar. Then the brain was put on the shelf where it always is kept. On the morrow every one went his way to his sport. Then Creek McMath and Compra went upon round adventures of Ulster. This Keith was the most troublesome pest that was in Ireland. This is the way it went. Across the glen of Emmen, having with him 3 warriors and the heads of the men of Ulster, while the jesters of Emmen were at play with the brains out of the hand of them when carried it off. For he knew that if it had been foretold that the measure would avenge himself after his death. In every battle and every combat which men of Celtchar, which men of Ulster, Keith was to carry the brain in his girdle to see whether he can compress a famous deed by slaying men of Ulster with it. Once then Keith went eastwards and took the drove of cows from Menros. The men of Ulster overtook him in pursuit, and the men of Conchobar came up from the other side to rescue him, and battle was fought between them. Conchobar himself went into battle, and it was then that the woman of Conchobar begged Conchobar to come aside so that they might see his shape. For there was not earth-shaped human being like the shape of Conchobar, both for beauty and figure and dress, for the size of symmetry and proportion, for eye and hair and whiteness, for wisdom and manner and eloquence, for raiment and noblest, and equipment of weapons, and wealth, and dignity, for bearing valour and race. Conchobar was faultless indeed. However, was to the advice of Crete that he imported Conchobar, and they went aside alone to be seen by the woman. Keats went in the midst of the crowd of women. He adjusted the brain of Mercer in the sling and threw it so that it hit the crown of Conchobar's head, so that 2/3 of it entered his head. And he fell upon his head forward to the ground. The men of Ulster ran towards him and carried him off from Crete. On the brink of the fjord of Delbrush was Conchobar's. It was that Conchobar fell. His grave is there where he fell, and the pillar stone at his head, and another at his feet. The men of Conchobar were then rooted to Skek and Nacron. The men of Ulster were driven eastwards again to the fjord of Delbrush. Let me be carried out of this, said Conchobar. I shall give the kingship of Ulster to anyone who will carry me as far as my house. I will carry you, said Cinbert to his own attendant. He put a cord around him, and he carried him on his back to Agres in Sabfruit. The attendant's heart broke within him. Hence the saying, Ken barricades kinship over Ulster. To wit the king upon his back for half the day. However, the fight was kept up after the king from 1 hour of the day to the same hour of the next day, after which the men of Ulster were routed. In the meantime, Conchobar's physician Finnegan was brought to him. He was he who knew from the smoke arose from the house, who many were ill in that house, and every disease that was in it. Well, said Figan, if the stone is taken out of your head, you will be dead forthwith. If it is not taken out, however, I would heal you, but it will be blemish for you. It is easier for us, said the men of Ulster, to bear the blemish than his death. His head was then healed, and he was stitched with a thread of gold, the colour of Conchobar's hair, so it was the same colour gold, and the physician said to Conchobar that he should be on his guard, lest anger should come on him, and that he should not mount a horse, and that he should not have connection with a woman, that he should not eat food greedily, and he should not run. In that doubtful state, he then went and lived as he lived 7 years. As he was not capable of action, he remained in his seat only until he heard that Christ had been crucified by the Jews. At that time a great trembling came over the elements, and the heaven and the earth shook. Enormity of the deed was done. And the Christian God was to be crucified without guilt. What is this? Conchobar said to his druid. What great evil is being done on this day? This is true indeed, said the druid, who then tells the story of the crucifixion. What an awful deed, said Conchobar. That man now was born the same night in which you were born, on the 8th before the calendars of January, through the year was not the same. It was then that Conchobar believed, and he was one of the 2 men who believed in Christianity in Ireland, before the coming of the faith to the rest. The story, which ends in a piece of radical fantasy, suppressed how being uttered by Conchobar, is clearly incomplete, for it does not tell of Conchobar's death. The following paragraph, taken from another version, does give the conclusion. And thereupon Conchobar said, the men of the world would know what I can do in fighting against the Jews for the sake of the crucifixion. Then he rose and made the onslaught, until Mirix's brain jumped out of his head, so that Conchobar died forthwith. Hence the Gael said that Conchobar was the first pagan who went to heaven in Ireland. For the blood that sprang his head was a baptism to him, and Conchobar's soul was taken out of what the Christians considered hell and sent to Christian heaven. again, this was one of the first countings of when Christianity really started to take hold of Ireland. And unfortunately, it did take over, and the Irish, we really lost a lot of our culture and old ways of practicing. There are of us now that are struggling and fighting to gain back that which was stolen by Christianity. And that is the tragic death of the Ulster Heroes.